Welcome to Essential Ingredients, powered by NextGen Purpose. EI serves up thoughtful conversations with industry leaders and pioneers who support a regenerative future for our food system. The stories shared by our guests are meant to spark curiosity and inspire informed global change. Good afternoon and welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm your host, Justine Reichman. With me today as my co-host is Lisa Johnson. She is a consultant and researcher, and I'm so pleased to have you with me.
Thanks, Justine. Nice to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. And as our guest today, Aaron Magenheim, and he is a global food and Agtech consultant.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
So are we. It is great to have you here. I'm excited to talk about Agtech and food tech and all things that go within that scope. So there's a lot to talk about as we started to talk before this podcast. So I'm excited for you to get to know everybody, for them to get to know you. And maybe before we start, just so our listeners can get a better idea of who we're talking to, you can maybe tell them a little bit about who you are and what global food and Agtech consulting does.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Aaron Magenheim. I grew up in my family's irrigation business in Salinas. I started selling ag technologies about 12 years ago and kind of opened up a unique opportunity to start traveling around the globe as ag and food tech started becoming a popular thing in 2014. I've been able to travel to Asia about 70 times, in Latin America 15 plus times, Israel, Europe, around the globe, consulting, speaking at events, working with governments and clients, really just getting to know what's going on, how people solve problems in different parts of the ecosystem and different parts of the world. And, today we have two businesses, Agtech Insight. We do kind of that global ag tech, food tech consulting side of things. We have a global team, work across the ecosystem. And then we have a newer business called Growers Insight, where we focus on really helping and building operational strategy for larger farmers, food companies, and governments, and just larger entities to help them actually utilize all these great tools that we have today.
Wow, that is all encompassing.
It's we just find opportunities and then build teams and expertise to be able to help fill holes in the industry. And so it's been a fun and unique journey and built a lot of friends and things along the way.
So you said this is your family business, did you say?
Well, my family had an irrigation business in Salinas, and so I grew up in that, which exposed me to everything farming, food, but then I've been able to I exited that really 12 years ago and have been able to kind of expand, outside of Central California to, to this global, global opportunities.
Wow. And it seems like you've grown this astronomically, like threefold, twofold.
Well, I went to the first Silicon Valley Ag Tech conference in 2014, and the only reason I was there was because I was at a conference in Salinas a couple weeks before that. And they said, "Hey, you need to come to Silicon Valley." And I said, "I don't go to the city. I don't like, it's just too much to deal with. I'm a country boy." They got me to come, and I set up a booth with all this stuff that I was reselling at the time. And I had, all these Google people and startups and VCs. I didn't know what a VC was. I was like, what's a VC? And, just, it's a new world to me. But they came to me and said, the stuff you're selling is, 10, 20 years old technology. Do you know what a smartphone is? Like, what's wrong with you? I go, yeah, I know what's going on in my personal life, but, our industry, this is, we're coding with MS-DOS and, that's been out of the picture for 20 years. So, anyways, it's been just a unique opportunity to take kind of my roots, but then, expand significantly beyond that.
That's amazing. That's great. So now you've been doing this. And so how did you go from, going back, you were in this sort of backwards world, right? And you took a leap of faith and you went to this new world because you got a little sort of peek at it in Silicon Valley, where you felt like it sounded like you're like, where am I? Right? Yeah. So what was that transition like for you?
The wave just kind of took me. I was not expecting it at all. Like I said, I show up to this event, a week beforehand, they said, hey, there's like 50 people registered. I don't know if anybody's going to show up. They sent out 70,000 emails, and we had like almost 300 people show up, because it was really the first like ag tech focused event around the globe. And so, next thing you know, I'm getting calls and emails, and I mean, I said I have to start a new business to separate my existing businesses and what I know from this whole crazy world, and I don't know what it's going to look like. So, next thing I know, hey, can you come and speak at this event in Japan and then in Latin America, and just kind of expanded. So it was just things coming into me, and at that point, ag tech was pretty much Monsanto at the time buying Climate Corp for almost $1 billion in late 2013. So all of a sudden, everybody says, ooh, there's money here. I was one of 2 people from ag at this ag tech event, and it was like that until maybe 3 or 4 years ago. None of your food companies had VC arms, or nobody was looking at this technology thing from the industry. And so it just kind of pulled me along, and I said, well, I'll figure that out, put someone to run my current businesses, and just learn. And worked with hundreds of startups and hundreds of VCs just to understand what's going on. There's not much money in any of that, we found, but it's a great learning curve. So a lot of it's just kind of pulled me along. And so we call ourselves the OGs of ag tech, because we've been in it like 8-10 years now. And so, those of us have been in this industry for such a long time. We just, there wasn't a whole bunch of people around then. So if you were from the field or new farmers, like everybody wanted to talk with you. So I was just kind of a lot of right time, right place. And I was homeschooled from 4th grade through high school, which gave me a lot larger opportunity to look at the world in different ways. My dad started his business when I was 13, so I was his first employee, and so I was able to kind of say, hey, this makes sense, I'm going to do that, that doesn't. And so I was able to just kind of jump on the wave and say, I'm in a good place, let's see where this goes.
Wow, I love that. And it's so fun how I mean, my mom started her business at our dining room table when I was a kid, and I worked in every aspect of her business until I was a VP, right, for years. So I mean, I can see that. I can see you doing that, and that kind of resonates with me. So, but getting back to food tech and ag tech and all things having to do with this, for those listening and those watching, and Lisa coined it when she said, we got to ask, what is ag tech and what is food tech for the people listening? So I'm going to give it to Lisa here, because she was the one that said, we really got to start at the beginning here.
We probably need to do that. Yes.
So, if you could, would you humor us for those listening and those watching? Because, I think sometimes we take it for granted that we know what we're talking about, but we got listeners and viewers that sometimes want to chime in and listen, because we create a level playing field for everyone. So if you would.
Yeah, so I mean, ag tech, it means a lot of different things, and so ag tech is a newer term. Precision ag is an older term. So precision ag came around maybe 30 years ago with GPS on tractors. It was precision ag. So there's still, depending on where you go in the world, and if you go to Latin America, it's agro. If you go to Asia, it's agri-tech, and a lot of Europe is agri-tech, and here's just ag tech. We tried to get a copyright on it in 2014 and decided that we probably wouldn't be able to coin the phrase for ourselves, but so it can mean a lot of different things to us. So until about 3 years ago, I said ag tech is all about anything digital in agriculture and food. Anything digital, that's ag tech, that's food tech. It's collecting information, it's using different tools to aggregate it, understand what it means, and presumably make decisions off of it. But now, you also have this biotech. So I still call it biotech: seed breeding, chemicals, fertilizers, biopesticides, all of that. I call that biotech for agriculture, but biotech, of course, goes into people and animals and other things as well. So some people say ag tech is, all encompassing animal food or animal breeding, seeds, genetics, etc. including the digital space. Sometimes some people just consider the digital space. So for this conversation, I think let's say ag tech is, anything kind of in the digital realm that has to do with, food, animals. Food tech would be, anything in that same realm that has to do with more post-processing sides.
So wait a second. So how does food tech and where is food tech as it relates to ag tech?
So we typically say food tech is like post farm gate. So ag tech is going to be anything that happens on the farm. Once it gets into a processing facility, once it's bagged, once it's in a clamshell, now it becomes food tech because it's being stored. It's not on the plant anymore. It's not a live animal. It's being transitioned to something else. And so that's where we consider food tech. Some people will say, food tech isn't going to be chopped lettuce. Well, it's going through a transformation, so it should be, it should have a different term, but typically it's like to farm gate or post farm gate would be more food tech. And so there's a lot of gray areas. I mean, a lot of these industries, you're growing lettuce, you're chopping lettuce, you're washing lettuce, you're, packaging it. And, so, there's different pieces in that supply chain as well.
So if you're a supply chain or logistics company and you're using blockchain, that might be considered food tech.
I would consider it food tech unless they work outside of agriculture and food as well. Then they might just call it supply chain technology or something along those lines. And so that's where there's some, distribution, like, there's a lot of crossover that can happen there. But yeah, you can dissect this stuff a billion different ways, but from a high level, if you say whatever, once it's done being grown and it's being moved to some sort of different process or different location, then, let's give it a new name.
Okay, so but before we move on, Lisa, I gotta ask the integration of blockchain in this for those that are unaware of what blockchain is.
Ooh,
how does that integrate?
yeah, I would love for Aaron to talk more about that because it's not even in my realm.
You brought it into the conversation. I had to ask.
I did that.
Blockchain is fun because, like drones and robots in 2016, everybody thought it was going to just take over our entire supply chain, and we've seen it fail multiple times. Blockchain is a very heavy technology. It's very hard to implement, takes a lot of technology, a lot of tools. It's very cumbersome. So we have traceability, like, okay, you want to have an idea where your lettuce was grown, which lot it got, washed with. And so if you have a problem in the store, you can trace it back reasonably well. Blockchain would just be another level of that. It's not any more information necessarily. It's just saying that when it got washed, it's not just someone saying that it got washed, writing it on a piece of paper and it going into a system. It's actually having like a read write ledger in the back, basically, guaranteeing that this happened. And so there's a lot more kind of technology mechanisms that go into it. And, there's some places, I think the biggest opportunity for blockchain in ag is more in developing countries and using it to verify that product was the right product, that it's real honey and it wasn't, cut. And or paying people where in places like Argentina where you don't have a stable currency. So so blockchain and cryptocurrency work together. You do a YouTube search and I'm sure you can find a lot to dive into it further, but traceability, blockchain is basically just another level on top of that. But the thought that we're going to go in and blockchain end to end every part of our supply chain or our business is just, it's not feasible today.
So Aaron, you just led me to like another really curious topic, traceability.
Yeah. So this is fun because there's some newer government regulations for traceability that are supposed to be in place by 2026. And so everybody's like, oh, the new, traceability deals. And what it comes down to is that a majority of the traceability for fresh produce that they want is already being done because you can pretty much figure whatever the government does, it's already been done by the industry a few years beforehand, because I mean, they had to protect themselves. If there's, if there's E. coli outbreaks and you didn't have anything in place, well, you're going to get sued for a whole lot more money if you can't pull the stuff off the shelf and don't know where it came from. So
farmers go out of business for that reason, right?
exactly, and lose consumer trust and things along those lines. So, industries put a lot of this stuff in place, but and every organization, uses different types of traceability. So there's food safety traceability, there's Global Gap, there's Primus, there's these different food safety traceability auditing and kind of platforms that are used by certain grocers. So a lot, and then if you go send to the EU or you're sending to China, there's a whole nother kind of suite of requirements that they have. So IBM has tried to get into the deal with Walmart. That's not gone as well as they thought over the last few years, and so everybody's kind of trying to rethink it. So traceability, and it can mean something different. Like as a consumer, I'm happy to pay double for certain products. And my wife will bring home, there's some crackers a few weeks ago she brought home. They tasted great. It said, full visibility, transparency, this and that, traceability. And so number one, I don't have a QR code, so I have to type in their email address or their web address, which is just crazy in today's world. So put a dang QR code on the package so I could just snap it, and then it takes me to their website. Okay, great. So to them, traceability meant that I could go to their website, they would have, their commitments. Okay, well, that doesn't mean anything to me, really. I mean, it's great that you say that, but show it to me, prove it to me. So, and then they source everything. So they had a list of 10, 15 different farms that they source stuff through. So you could see a little picture of the farm and, a couple sentences on why they're sustainable and what their, traceability story is. And then I went to each one of those farms. Nowhere, I mean, it was hard to even find what state these places were located in. Nonetheless, I couldn't tell which field, which crop, when it was harvested, what was it like. I want to know more information. So to me as a consumer, and we're seeing this more and more, especially follow Asia if you want to see consumer trends. Europe used to be, but it seems like Asia is kind of taking the consumer trend thing over. But I want to know at least which field it came from. Give me a picture of it. Tell me who harvested it. Like, connect me with the people that own it, with the people that harvested it, and things along those lines. So traceability could mean a lot of different things. In sustainability, it could be, hey, sustainability metrics, but there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that can be put in there as well. And a lot of it comes down to we just don't collect the information well enough from the farm or anywhere in the supply chain to be able to share that information. So traceability again could mean a lot of different things, but I think fundamentally, it's getting better and better. It's being driven by the consumer and by retailers.
Yeah, it's historically been a term used in food safety. I think it's probably most importantly used in food safety. So for example, if there's an outbreak of illness and the FDA can relate that to a fresh produce item through giving the people affected a lot of surveys. Let's say all the people ate tomatoes from a certain restaurant chain. Well, that's important, but unless they know where that tomato came from, they have to shut down the entire tomato industry, which involves the loss of all the tomatoes already on trucks en route, arriving at stores and everything in the field. So in order to avoid having that happen, traceability is in place. And like Aaron said, it started with the industry to ensure that that happens less frequently. So they can actually pinpoint, those tomatoes went to this restaurant via this truck. It's from this field, from this farm. And in some cases, on very sophisticated farms, you can even tell who was involved in the harvest. And in that way, maybe that field and everything associated can be shut down. It's a more targeted recall. But when they don't know where that produce came from, it affects the entire industry, sometimes for weeks at a time. So it's a very difficult challenge. And traceability is super important.
I'm curious, do you find that the need or the quest for that was driven by the consumer or by the business?
It's been mostly driven by the retailers, the grocers, and, some of the bigger food companies, because, the reality is that they have insurance to cover those types of situations. So, but if you have a couple of problems, then insurance has to pay out more, and nobody wants people to get sick. So, it's been mostly driven. I don't know that, I mean, I guess a bit by consumers because it's in newspapers, when we have big E. coli outbreaks like we did, like we have in the past, that everybody knows that that's a problem, and then nobody wants to go eat at Chipotle because, they figure that that was the deal. The hard thing with traceability is that most companies look at it as a sunk cost, especially on the food safety side. Like, well, we just have to do this to satisfy our buyers or the next people down the street, and we're going to do the net, pretty much the minimum that we absolutely have to do to get our insurance and keep people happy. What they don't look at, and what we spend a lot of time looking at, is getting better information and tracking better, like this lettuce came from this lot, like this 5 acres on this 200-acre ranch in this region that grows lettuce. That, and to get that level of information and to track it better, as well as how many people were harvesting, and what inputs were put, when we sprayed, when we did certain cultural things, like there's business value around collecting that information as well. But as an industry, we're typically reactive. So Walmart says if you want to sell us leafy, you have to use IBM's food trace platform. That happened a few years ago. Nobody knew what it meant. I don't know if they still know what it means, but that was a requirement. So all the farmers said, well, okay, well, we have to use this. What does it mean? Nobody really knew what it meant. And so, but they're being reactive to it instead of saying, hey, we know that these things are coming down the pipeline. If we collect better information, we'll get better analytics for our business. We can make better decisions around different activities that we're going to do. It will actually make us money. But as an industry, we're typically reactive instead of proactive on these things. So there's a lot of opportunity to actually leverage these regulations or these requirements or even suggestions to improve our organizations. But a lot of times we're just kind of running at the things that we need to, and to keep our business in check, instead of looking at, hey, how does this fit into the bigger picture of where our business is going?
Right.
I want to pedal back for a second and hear about, if we can, Aaron, how did you feel confident shifting from a career in irrigation to suddenly being a global leader in animal ag tech, fresh produce, and all these other, dairy, all these other areas? What steps did you take, or who did you lean on to make that shift?
I've, just come across lots of mentors through the years. I also, so that's one piece, is just finding people that you connect with. And typically it's randomly. It's not like I'm going out looking for a mentor. Like, it's just someone you click with. And it's interesting because I kind of reflected on this a few months ago, and I said, seems like I end up having, 1, 2, 3 close mentors, and I work with them for 8 months, a year, maybe 2 years. A couple of them I still talk with a little bit more, but as I evolve and my businesses evolve, I end up having kind of, different conversations. And so people just kind of end up showing up. I guess another thing is just I really look at how can we help solve a problem and who are the best people to do this. When we started consulting full time 6 years ago, I said, I don't want to just bring a team in that says, hey, here's your problems. Half of the time we spent was for us to learn your business, and, now you know your problems, and here's a couple big ideas on how to fix them. I wanted to really build a team with the best subject matter experts around the globe to solve problems, not just point them out, but actually build a step-by-step process to execute and show results. And so I think it's been a accumulation of building that global team with people like yourself, Lisa, to bring in as very best specific subject matter experts in different areas, instead of me saying, well, yeah, I know a little bit about food waste, I can figure it out. And then that combined with our Growers Insight business is just focused on let's execute. Like, we don't need to tell you. I was on a phone with a new client earlier with someone in their organization that's not real excited about us coming to work with them in a month. He's like, consultants come in here and just tell us, 90% of what we already know, but how do you fix it? I go, well, we focus on how to fix it. And so I think it's just been a lot of listening, understanding where the opportunities are, vetting those out, and then surrounding myself. My philosophy and our businesses are built around building good ecosystems and people and businesses. We're not going to do everything, but we bring in the right tools and the right people to make sure to execute. So I think a lot of it also came from growing up in my family's business and having to figure out resources, and then growing up, in 4-H and homeschooled, where I had all these different resources. I want to go learn about that. It wasn't pick up a textbook. It was go to the library. Let's find the books that are interesting, and then let's go find someone that's a subject matter expert and talk to them about it. So, I started learning that in 4th grade. And so I think that's a lot different just where I go to. I pick up the phone and call people to get questions answered rather than look at Google. So, it's kind of, where do you go for your information? So yeah, it's just been a bit of a journey. And honestly, I like to push myself way outside of my limits and my comfort zone. And those are just things that I think my parents helped instill in me. And, I've had people around me that support that as well. So whether it's personally, sports, activities, or business, kind of pushing beyond that stuff. Like, if you're comfortable, you're doing something wrong in my book. Like, but that's not normal for our culture, especially in this country, is kind of push a little bit, but at the same time, I really just like to, kind of ask some of the crazy questions. And some of the stuff that we talked about years ago, people were like, you're crazy. And now it's, I said, hey, 2014, it'd be 7-10 years before robotics could even be close to being commercialized. It's been 8 years and they're getting closer. Another interesting thing is, 3 years ago, if you walked into any farm or food company pretty much and tried to talk about company culture and people behind the business, you would get laughed out the door. And now it's 90% of our conversations, like just in that 2-3 year period. So things are shifting, and I think it's just, a lot of it's just that global traveling and not just being stuck in a box, and just really understanding what's happening out there, and then looking at how it can affect your own life.
To that end, I'm curious, because you've traveled, I think, somewhere in Asia 70 times, and somewhere else, I kind of lost track on that, but I know that it was a lot.
Yeah.
How did you prepare to go there, to become culturally competent, to understand their traditions and understand the way that they do business? Because working in Asia, whether it's Japan or China or going to Mexico, business is done differently, and it's important to be culturally competent, to be able to understand how they do business.
Yeah, and it's interesting because growing up, we in California, we have Hispanics and we have white people for the most part, and so I kind of grew up in a bit of a sheltered lifestyle and in farming, and And I didn't leave the country till I was 26 years old. And, and once I did, I said, this is great, and so, I mean, I could pick up, and if I need to, I mean, end of the year, I had a partner say, hey, you need to come to Puerto Rico for a 1 hour meeting. And I'm like, Puerto Rico is not a far stretch, but it's still different. Within a week, I was there. I mean, I booked a hotel. Uber is like the best thing around because, you can get around. But it's really just been, I mean, I go places that I don't know a single person. Maybe I'm speaking at an event, or, I have an agenda, but I guess it's just been don't watch the news, don't worry about what people say, and just, I mean, if you accept the culture and go in under, with a excitement of, hey, this is going to be a new experience. It may be good, it may be bad. I've had both, but I'm going to go experience something different. I'm going to go check this out, and I'm going to do, and hopefully it turns out, and that's about it. It's
Okay.
and which is interesting because I came from a family that my mom would plan every minute of every vacation, what we were doing, just over planned a year and ahead of time, which is great for some things. But I'm like, hey, yeah, last 2 years ago, my house burnt down, and I said, I've had enough. Next day I was in Mexico. I just flew down to Mexico. So it's just like, I think it's just a matter of not having to worry a bunch, and not having super high expectations either, because if you go into something with really high expectations, then you might get disappointed. But if you go in and say, hey, this is going to be cool, I'll learn something, and worst case scenario, I lose something, then that's how it goes. So
Right. Yeah. Okay.
All in the attitude, huh?
All in the attitude. I mean, I know from like certain experiences that like when you go to, some places are more formal, right? You need to wear a tie in Mexico City, just for example. I know that when they go like this in some parts of the country as a hello versus like this. Simple things like that. And I know that like, the way that they do things in some parts of Asia, it's a little bit different than here. So that was kind of, I mean, I haven't done, I've done some business there, but I found it to be, I was stepping back a little bit to kind of listen to see how I should respond. That was just the way I did it, because I wanted to hear how people were speaking to each other. What as a New Yorker, I'm not from California, I'm not quite as laid back. And I can be, I can just be a little bit, I can be direct. I can, and that can be oftentimes perceived as abrasive, or, a little bit more, not as friendly, just a little bit more abrasive is the word, right? So I watch myself, because I know myself like that. But when you're laid back like yourself, you're probably already waiting to, being more laid back and a little bit cooler. And I just want to get to the point, so.
It's been a lot of personal growth. I mean, I'm typically very leader, very forward, and I realize that when you travel like this, no, you step back and you just let.
Okay, so you did the same thing I did.
I had to do the same thing because I mean, I would typically come in, hey, this is what we're doing, and then I look around like, wait a minute, they're like, yeah, that guy's not from around here, and so. I mean, and other things like, Asia's Asia when you're in America, but my wife is from the Philippines. I met her when I had a business over there, but Philippines is similar to Thailand, similar to Vietnam, but there's still some big differences. But then go to Japan was the hardest place that I've been to in Asia, because like, it's just so proper. Like, I felt like I couldn't walk down the street the right way. And then you go to China and it's kind of in the middle. And so, it's like we kind of, until you start traveling, you think that Asia's Asia and Latin America's Latin America. There's so many differences. And so I think it's the big thing, they say this about weddings all the time, and I think it goes with anything, is that nobody else knows what is expected and what's supposed to happen. And so if you just kind of go into it like, let's watch, let's learn, and then I'm going to start picking things up, you know, you can get a long ways, but you can't be hard on yourself because, oh, I said hello the wrong way. Like, you know, if
No, of
you're
course not.
friendly, people are happy to communicate with you and figure things
And
out.
I think exactly what you said was like, you sit back, you watch, you learn, and then you kind of participate.
Yeah.
Because it's so important to be mindful of other cultures and routines and the way that people do things. So I think that was really important. Your perspective on the way that you shared it, because I thought it was me and because I was an abrasive New Yorker.
Yeah. I just, I don't know. Once I started traveling, I just kind of got hooked. And I mean, I think it's something that everybody needs to spend more time doing. I mean, don't, because the airline flights just keep going up. But, on the other side, and don't have excuses. I mean, I have 4 kids. My youngest, he was a year and a half old, and we took him to Costa Rica. And, so you can do things like, I think it's also like, just don't allow yourself to have excuses is one of the biggest things just in building a business, or just kind of, in your life in general. It's real easy to say, well, it's snowing outside, I don't want to go get on my bike. Or, there's when I travel a lot, people say, oh, have you looked at the the state, what is it, the state website that tells you, what the level of terrorism is or something in different states, or in different countries. And like, oh, you're going to the Philippines, they've had bombs, and that, it's a red level. And I'm like, okay, so I've done that a couple times. You look, okay, they're red, come back and look at the US, we're red too. So, you can't go and worry about all of these different things that are going on. So, I think it's just, really just having the interest and the let's go try it. You always got to try everything twice, not once. It's got to be twice, because the first time might have just been a bad experience, and the second time might have been great. So,
Well, before we wrap up, I'm just curious. So, you have these two consulting companies, if you will, that, you have, and I'm curious, in the food tech and the ag tech space, where you see things are headed in the next few years. And I don't know what else Lisa, wanted to talk about, but I know that we are, we have just a few more minutes. So I just wanted to make sure that we talked about what the future looks like and what your thoughts are on that, and anything else Lisa wanted to discuss.
Yeah, the crystal ball thing's interesting. I mean, there's so much opportunity, and it depends on where you're at in the world. We have a very long supply chain in the US. It's been over consolidated, so we actually have to decentralize our food supply chain and most of our supply chain in the US, whereas a lot of other countries like Philippines and Colombia, they're very short. You eat what's grown in a 30-mile radius, and it's in a season. And so in general, there's lots of different things going on in digitalization. And I think the biggest change that we're going to see is people transformation. So it's kind of, starting to hand the, businesses and leadership from the traditional kind of people who have been running these businesses for the last 30, 40 years, and transitioning. And so agriculture, food, we typically it's an art, it's an art form. How do you make decisions? It's an art form. How do you make decisions? It's using your gut. We're transitioning to a situation where we're using data to make our decisions. So it's kind of going from an art to a science. And so that's the biggest shift. And with that is a people aspect of younger generation coming in. We want to look at things digitally. We have to, you can't learn to paint the Picasso in a couple of years. It takes a long time to do it. And so kind of using data to help that people transition, that's really where we see opportunities. And then once we get our data structured and our traceability figured out a little bit better, then we can start using AI and machine learning and that type of stuff. But at this point, most of it's, number one, is huge opportunities to connect with people through social media that weren't there 10 years ago. Most organizations don't know how to leverage that. And then the other piece is just, I think, building brands and getting consumers closer to people. And all of that entails digitalization and change management.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to hear, Aaron, about how you build a marketplace or a market or demand for ag tech products. I feel like, Justine has talked to so many people in the food space who create a new category, and then they have to build up demand for that new food product. And I wonder if it's similar in ag tech. I've heard that the biggest hurdle is uptake of this new technology, whatever it might be.
Yeah, so I mean, our Growers Insight business, all we do is help with that adoption piece. And I would love to see more companies doing similar types of things. We're happy to collaborate. We're collaborating with different organizations to do that. But, the reality is, that we need to focus. Solving a problem is good, but at the end of the day, it has to it has to have a financial benefit. I'm sorry, we love the world, we love to do these things, but at the end of the day, everything takes money, and you have to get money from someone to do these things. And so in order to get uptake, you have to have the right process in place, the right people in place, and then not just that we're going to reduce your irrigation usage or your fertilizer usage by 20%, because you're talking to people that don't know what that number is. They don't know how much their costs are, like we went back to traceability on that block of lettuce. So you have to look at everything from a financial standpoint is one piece. The other piece is go through trusted advisors, go through the organizations that are there. It's got to be a different model, and they're starting to realize that they have to change their agronomy model. They have to change, what they've been doing for a long time to kind of work in the new world. But, it really comes down to what is that ROI, and you hear that all the time, but it can be a challenge, but you have to have a process in place to get to that financial piece, and then leverage the relationships that are out there. Those are really the two key pieces. And then the last one is just collaborate. Find 2 to 3 companies upstream and downstream. So you do this, find a couple companies this way that you can collaborate with, and a couple companies this way, because you're all talking to the same people. People have different problems that is at the top of their list today. So even if you're not solving that problem, introduce them to someone that could, and then they'll come right back to you.
There's one quick question I had for you too, and I know we're reaching the end of the time, but you have worked together with a bunch of startup accelerators.
Yep.
And I wondered, what do you feel is the benefit of those accelerators, and how does that work in general?
It shifted over time. 2014, there was like 3 accelerators in the world for ag tech. Now there's like almost 100 that we track. So it used to be that if you could make it into an accelerator, then VCs would look at you and want to invest in you, because they figured the accelerators were kind of doing the weeding for them. Over time, they've realized that's not the case. A lot of the accelerators have shifted more towards a kind of corporate innovation strategy. So being able to have, a dozen corporates that are interested in certain tools and technologies, and then bringing companies that could fit that into them. And so, I think that it's good for exposure, but the problem then that has been created is that if you're a Bayer and you're in Bayer Leaps and you're focused on innovation and you're investing and you're focused on these on the different accelerators and stuff, that's great, but you're not necessarily as connected to and have the feedback loops with the operational production side of the business that's going to be using these tools. So that's the challenge today. And so I think that it's beneficial just from a recognition, like, put it on your wall and maybe tell people. But from an industry standpoint, most people that you're going to sell something to do not care that you've they don't even know what an accelerator is. And if they do, that's not a rite of passage. So it used to be a rite of passage for investors. Today, it's a little bit more of a rite of passage for larger corporates to at least kind of get into their cycle, but there's still a big disconnect between that innovation team and the other 99% of the business that it will actually use those tools. So don't think just because you got an innovation team to invest in you, or you're part of an accelerator that this company is involved in, that's a shoe-in. You still have to work the operational side of that business, because that's where you're going to get, your next proposal signed.
I will say though, and I hear what you're saying, and I think that that's probably all valid. Not probably, I mean, I hear from your experience, I'm sure that's all valid. I do think for the individuals in the accelerator, many solo founders do it, and it gives them community, and it gives them boundaries, and it gives them a footprint to use. So I think there's value in that, which they may not get elsewhere. It's like giving them structure. So, there's different values to different things. So where it may not give them the same value it did years ago, the cachet to get the financing or the VCs, I think that it will still give them value many times with the community. It may help them find a co-founder. It may help them find, a lot of other resources that they may not have otherwise found.
Absolutely agree. I mean, it's, from a personal growth standpoint, it's super helpful. I've mentored lots of different lots of different startups through accelerators. We built accelerators. So, I mean, there's a lot of other pieces to it, but, most people want to get into an accelerator, it seems like, for the funding aspect or for the market, exposure aspect. But there are a lot of really good mentors and different other processes and tools and collaboration and stuff, that's involved in them as well. So yeah, thanks for adding that, because it is another big piece.
I think there's lots of different things that can go into it. So so anyway, Lisa, did you have any other questions before we wrap up?
I could talk with Aaron all day long.
I know,
Such a wealth of information, but we will have to maybe have him on again, because
we will definitely have to have him on again.
Yeah,
I think there's lots to talk about. But Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. If folks wanted to get in touch with you to learn more about you and your consulting organizations, how might they do that?
Yeah, super active on LinkedIn, just Aaron Magenheim, or Agtech Insight on any of the social networks. Visit our Agtech Insight website. We have some good different tools and just kind of research information there. And then Growers Insight, we've launched some new data graphics recently that got a whole lot of
they were great.
A lot of people asking questions and stuff. So everything's on can be connected through LinkedIn as well, but growersinsight.com, agtechinsight.com, or any of those businesses.
We'll make sure to throw that in the show notes for you. Great. Thanks so much, Aaron, for joining us. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for co-hosting with me. As always, a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you both.
To learn more about these episodes and access show notes, go to nextgenpurpose.com and choose podcast. If you like this episode, head to Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform to subscribe and leave us a review. Visit the Next Gen Purpose YouTube channel to subscribe to our EI videocast and give this episode a like while you're there. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Next Gen Purpose, and connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Justine_Reichman. Thanks for joining us.